Hello and welcome back to module number 7. Today's theme is going to be about object-oriented programming, or in my world it's S3 and S4, and we will see what is the difference between them. But before we move on, I would like to go over the assignment, module 6 numbers assignment, and I'll try to make it as coherent as I possibly can. Again, I will expect you to ask questions, and that's your job. My job is to answer your question. So in this realm of things, in this assignment, one of the things that I try to teach you or try to consider is the idea of the matrix and how can we add values to the matrix in order for us to do that. So again, the simple way to do that, in this case, declare A and B, and the matrix for A content, it will be different from the matrix of B content, and I will be able to do that. The next subject, and which is quite interesting, and this is the idea of, based on the matrix and based on what we have learned today, to add another dimension to our structure. And by doing that, I will use the command line diagnostical in order for me to add matrix to it. So in this case, I will add a matrix, and in this case, I will declare it is E diagnosed, and I will have the container 4, 1, 2, 3, and I will be able to build a matrix in two ways, by 4 by 4. And in this case, this is what it will look like in how to build that. So in this case, if you will run it in the R, he will show you the outcome of this idea. So this is a warm-up to the question number 2, using these functions to build a matrix with size 4 with the following value in order for us to do that. 4, 1, 2, 3, and we are going to use a loop in order for you to assign values of a row and a column. And so in this case, I'm going to declare, so G will be the content of the function, and I will have a container inside of it 3, 5, and 5, and I will add another dimension that I will be 2, and in this case I will say while, and again the if condition, I smaller than 6, and in this case I will open up in order for me to do that. So if you will copy the text or the code, you will be able to see the outcome of it and what is it really means in that case. So G in the end will run the code and be able to do that. If I will copy it, just to let you see it, I will copy it and assignment, I already have it in a script, so you will get it in the idea of it. Again, I'm running it, and I will open it a while if condition, and if I will run it, this is the end result of it and how it be applied. So again, this issue of the assignment and to use the diagnostical building is quite nice, because it gives us a ability to extend, ability to expand the framework of our work, using the diagnostic function to build a matrix of size 4 with the volume following volumes, and I will use that in that case, and it will generate the matrix. I will do that the same thing in order for me to apply. So this is how I see the assignment, but this is one interpretation. You can do, I am quite open to your interpretation. This is my interpretation, and I hope it make more sense. Okay, and with that regard, I'm going to go to start a new subject, and the subject is object-oriented programming, or OOP. Everything that you touch in R, ranging from numbers to characters, basically is an object. And in the idea of R promoting a packaging separate but related data items onto one class's instance help to keep track of what you're doing with the variables. So basically in R we have, with regard to object oriented, we have two application. One is the classes and one is the idea of the classes, and that leads to different emphasis. So the R basically object has a system that will help us to generate generic function that everyone knows how to do that. And a class is basically on a description of things, how object of a certain type look like. So the object is basically, what I'm saying is, an instance of a class. So the generic function is a function which dispatch methods. And the idea here is that the method is the implementation of a generic function for an object of particular class. So what we have here is basically our object that store data elements, are numbers of different classes, and you can use different methods to operate on them. Example of an object, a variable. Another example is a vector or a list or array or matrix or even data frame. Common attributes of our object with regard to classes is the idea of the defined type of object, which help us to define what does it entail, and the mode and the type of, that's part of how we operate with regard to the R. So there are two types of R object, S3 and S4. And again, this is really important because from now on, you're going to see that we're going to exchange the S3 and S4. S4 is the more modern element, but S3 has been for a long time, so it's a common use to it. So the S3 is a class and method from the beginning. It's informal methods. S4, in comparison, it was developed later and has more formal method, and that's why a lot of people started to use the S4 as a cover-up to their methodology or to the model they are using. So the idea here is that testing object types and modes help us to understand the idea of what is the essence of S3 and S4. So our object, as we learn, is the mode of Z, it can be determined automatically by the type of thing stores in Z, such as numbers, characters, if it is a mode or a list, and what is the difference between them. The class of Z is either set by default dependent on how it was created or explicitly by the user. You define it, and based on it, you define the class that you are using. So you can check the object class and change it if you are determined to do that. It determines how the function deal with the Z that is the object in this class, in this example. So what is a class and what are the methods? A class is an abstract definition of a real object, which means that a method is a function that performs specific calculation on an object of a specific class. So generic function is used to determine the class and its argument and select the appropriate methods. A generic function is a function with a collection of methods. So let's talk more specifically about classes, and I'm going to use the notes that was posted in 2004 by Friedrich Lentzschitz, and he defines the idea, what does it entail, how we are doing it, and what does it entail. So one of the things that he does so well is the idea And this is another a good example of the literature. It's from Chambers in 1988, programming with data. And in this case, he defined what is a class and what is a method. And he says that software abstraction of a real-world object reflect how we think of an object and what the information they contain. It defines in terms of slot, and the object is an instance of a class. So define the structure and it allowed us to utilize the object that we are trying to do. A method is a function that performs an action on a data. So it defines a particular function that will behave depending on the class of its argument. So this is a good understanding of the class and method with that regard. I'll post this article. I think it will give you a better understanding of how the R and data and the object-oriented programming function works in R, because he's still alive. He works in Stanford nowadays, and he still lectures about the idea of the S3 versus the S4 in that regard. So, S3 versus S4. The S language has two object systems, known formally as S3 and S4. So S3 is object class and method that are available in R from the beginning. The S4 is a little bit later development, and it is again started to appear more and more. I would like to note that our textbook comments on difference between S3 and versus S4 is that he outlined that S3 is older, it is more simple, more dynamic, but less structural, and has a single dispatch. Comparison, the S4 is more structure, more regressive, and has a lot of multi-dispatches that allowed us to do more with that. So what is the S3 classes stands for? The most common used class. So it can be applied to multiple data types, and it can be applied for print a summary. It can be dispatched on the first argument, allowed us to change the class of existing object. So the S3 class has no formal defined definition. Basically, it's a list with a class attributes set to some class name. And the idea here is that it operates in a very simple way. Example. Let's take an example of a list. So I have the first line, which is a list of name, age, and GPA. The class S, in this case, will be resulting to display to me all those attributes or all those lists into one definition or the one take on the code. So the note that in this case the attribute R functions set the class attributes of the object. So we have the tool, or do we have the function to take out the class and separate it, and in order for us to understand what is it. So using construction to create a good object. And this is very good practice, because when you're going to create your R package, you're going to create an object. So a good practice is to use the same name as classes to create those objects. So in this case, I will create a function which I will call student, and in this function I will have G, A, and G, N, A, and G, and I will give her some dimension to it. G will be bigger than 4, and G will be smaller than 0, and stop, and I will give some value, and I will run it. So in this example, again, if I will add the idea of what I've done before, and I will run the S as an S3S, it will give me the idea what does it entail and how to do that. I like to point out again that in this list, I want to show you that in this case, this is where the R will come back to you. And if we will define error in this case, it will happen, it will end up in this way. So this is where it's becoming interesting, with that regard of the classes and how we class the object, in this case the students, in that regard. When you are writing your own generic function, which is part of the whole structure, in this case, we have the print, we have the function, we have the use method, and we have the environment. So in this case, this is the structure of a generic function that you want to create. You can see that we have a single call use methods, which the name of the generic function passed to it. So it is dispatcher function, which will handle all the background details. And again, this is the idea behind it, with the use of use method function into it when we are applying. So what is the definition, or what is the functions that we are using under S3? We are defining the class, we can create the object, we can refer member variable onto the object. In this case, it will be the $, and we can implement generic function or declare generic by using use method function. So all that is part of the structure of S3. I'm going to give you an example of the textbook and how we apply that. So he will call J, and he will say list, and he will say name, salary, and union. And if we will say I want to classify this data based on class, he will give me the attributes, and he will show me what is it entail. So in this case, when we creating extension, one line creation, in this case Voodoo, the structure list, and I will give it a list, and I will say Voodoo, that will allow us to operate and embed it. So this is the idea of S3, and I would highly recommend you to read the textbook and also look at the other textbook, how they define it, how they simplify it in that. I will also post some example of that in Canvas. Okay, so now to the second class, and this is the S4. It is a little bit safer, and it allowed us to have multiple arguments in one class in order for us to do that. So this is a good thing, and I will try to make a comparison between S3 and S4. And when you define in S3 the class, you implement the constructor code. In S4, we're going to use the function setClass in order for us to do that. When we are building a new object in S3, we need to set a list, we need to set a setClass attributes, but in S4, it's really simple. You will say new, and you will name it the new object that you want to create. With regard to reference number variable, in this case, in S3, it will be a $. In S4, it will be the @. The implement generic function in this class, it will be S3 will define the classmate. In S4, it will set methods. So those are the things that is really important. So defining the S class. So in this case, I'm going to set a set class employee, and I'm going to have in that class of employees, I'm going to have a name, I'm going to have a salary, and I'm going to have a union in order for me to define it. And in this case, again, how did I do that? This is how I got to the slot into it in order for me to do that. So in this case, again, this is what I will do in order for me to do that. More function under S4, again, set class, and allowed me to do more than that, allowed me to embed another function, another set of data inside of the list. And so we will be able to use quite a lot. And you will see that when we come to analyze existing packages that already use and how they use these set methods into the application to do that. Example, set methods show student, function object, and cat object, and cat object name, cat object age, cat object GPA. And all of that in one take is quite stunning and quite powerful. So again, this is where we are going to start in order for us to access it or modify it, in order for it to apply it in a more accessible way for us to do it. Modification through reassignment, and again, this is something that is really important. And again, I know that I'm giving you the example in a small data bytes, but if you think about that in that sense, it will give you some structure of how to apply that and how to modify it, even though if you apply it to a larger data set. So slot function is again quite popular, and the ability to access or modify using a slot function, and in this case it will give us to do that. So the object management for S3 and S4, this is across the board. It allowed us to do all of things. ls is a function that lists all the current object, and you will examine to see if your object is available that you created in your code. rm function is to remove the object if you don't want to, and save function is the save an object that can be loaded later, and class and mode get more information of the structure of the object that you are using. And again, this is applying to both to S3 and S4, and exists return true or false depending of the object exist or not. There's more example throughout the textbook in pages 207, 230. The book had many examples that got into depth detail, both the use and the creation. I would like you to encourage to open the book to go over that. This is really important, because when you're going to down the line to create your own package, you will need to think about the S3 and the S4 as an object, and how are you going to manipulate it or create it in that assignment. So again, I summarize what I have created, what I have done, and again, this is some of the things that usually is important. The last stage I want to talk about is a package that is really important. And this package is the idea that allowed us to test the object types. And in order for you to install it, there's two ways to install packages. As you already know, is to type install packages, or to go to the interface in RStudio and ask to install it. So this is where to use it. And again, to create a method S3 example, this is where to use that, and see the second example, how to create a method S3 and how to apply that. And again, isna, a function, eat breakfast, true, my favorite cereal. And so in this case, I will add a list of things that I do in order for me to get the attributes and to see the use of attributes or method into it. And you can create the object and test it using this type of package in order for you to do that. So again, create our methods using the object and test, add this platform. Again, this is where it's going to be validity check to see the value of being given during the creation of the object. And in this case, this is what I will do. An example drawing from that is where I took it. So you will be able to test it yourself and to see what it makes sense. So this is all for now. We are getting into week number 8, and I'm going to start posting more and more information about creating the package. Start reading. I would assign you more reading about how to create a package. So we are getting closer. You will get an assignment about how to create an S3 and S4 and make the comparison why you have chosen it. And I hope you enjoy it. I think this is really important because this is really essential of the R programming and why is it so powerful. So until next time, have fun.